Hey, how's it going? Pretty good. Just going to be doing a slight stream for tonight because going into tomorrow and Friday, I won't have, unfortunately, the time to be able to live stream due to a couple shows. But I was going to do a couple demos real quickly in the beginning just to set this up. As people join in, they'll be able to watch this later on. Just kind of gives you a slight information about breakdown as I kind of do this one last drawing. I just wanted to set up this piece here. Okay. As I kind of finish up this setup, I'll explain a little bit as to what we have here. Each stream will have a little bit of a setup to some information, advice, tips, demos that I typically do on my own time or for classes. It's obviously not a full lesson, it just kind of gives you a little bit of information as to how I work on certain things. At the moment, I've kind of just set up a general grid of perspective. I'm going to be doing another vehicle tank. I've been doing a couple of these demos and drawings for the classes at Art Center and other schools, and this week was our military vehicle drawing week. And as I put up some of those drawings of process on social media, of course, people are very interested in knowing about what those are about. And so, as you can see, the actual process is one thing, but once you get to hear the explanation behind how I'm actually setting some of those up, it might give you a little bit more insight as to what I'm actually physically doing. Or at least mentally in terms of thinking. As you can see from the top, I just did a really quick side view study of a tank that I'm going to be drawing. It kind of gives you the basic information about what this thing is going to be. And from there, as I moved into these boxes, kind of shows you some of the different kinds of perspectives you can kind of play with, whether it's a simple 2-point, 1-point, 3-point, 3-point down angle, and of course even our flat 3/4 view. And the flat 3/4 view is where you're flattening the perspective using a long lens. As I get down to this particular section, I'm going to be using just a simple 2-point perspective to set this up. And the box itself, as to how you position it when you're drawing certain vehicles, has obviously the box form as an important factor. And the 3 different ways we can kind of draw these boxes as we establish the front and the side, F being front, and then S being side. Kind of gives you an idea as to what these planes are. But there are a couple of different ways you can think about how the box can be set up as a 2-point, where you can do something like this potentially, where the box has a little bit less of the front, much more of the side. You could also do a box perspective where it shows you much more of the front, less of the side. You could also then do a box perspective where it goes 50-50. So the orientation of the rotation of the box is kind of giving you the information as to how much of one plane you see than the other. Pretty obvious, when you start to see that and understand it. But when you're actually drawing things in perspective, like vehicle shapes, you don't necessarily have that in your thoughts. You don't really necessarily process it either. You tend to kind of think about, whoa, I have all this information. I just want to capture, the details that are on top of it. I can kind of see what the perspective is. It might be a 2-point. But again, you don't necessarily think about them in large sections of planes or shapes and forms. You just, again, take it as it is. So in the beginnings of vehicle drawings, it's always about being able to process all that massive amount of information to something very kind of minimal. The minimalism towards the shapes and the forms, which is, again, primitives. And as complicated as certain vehicles are, again, there's always ways to break them down, always. And that's your job, essentially, is to have the problem-solving ethics and thought process as to what you need to do to actually capture it onto the page. So with this particular tank that I'm drawing, I actually do have a reference shot in front of me on my computer because I wanted to have something to guide as to what I'm doing, and I draw from reference a lot. There's nothing wrong with that. A lot of the references I draw from are usually my own photographs. So I'll go on location, I'll take shots of angles that I want to go for. Obviously I draw on location a lot, and I also draw from memory a lot as well too. But drawing from references are the ways I build visual library. So to be able to actually get more information locked into my brain, I do a lot of repetition. I also draw from references as much as possible. So again, when people think about, well, should I use references? Am I allowed to? Absolutely. That's not in any form of a weakness. Everybody has to start their way, and when you even become a professional, those are very much important factors that you got to rely upon. Especially when it comes to building up the sense of confidence in being able to design, draw, create, whatever the case is. So referencing is a huge aspect about what most, if not all, artists will do to be able to capture the aesthetic quality, the functional elements, the details that are not necessarily so easy to remember. And of course, everybody always kind of connects me and everyone else to but this guy or that guy can do these amazing things from just straight memory. Great. And you're only talking about a 1% of individuals that are able to do that because they might have a very strong wiring of their brain to be able to absorb that information. But most general people cannot do that. So me being one of them, I had to use a lot of, again, visuals to help me guide me through. So again, the question from Amy is then how do you get good at guessing the vantage point without drawing them? Well, a lot of that is, again, practice of perspective. The actual, strict layering and constructing of all that perspective work from the horizon line to the vanishing points and establishing them on large sheets of paper, doing analog or digital, to see what they actually look like. So we do constant repetitions of building boxes and forms and space and using strict perspective. We then draw them with all the construction lines in there. So the more you do it, the more familiar you get with the general directions and lines. But of course, you are also the one in control of how this perspective will work, whether it's about me showing you one side or the other, or especially of being able to understand what tapering lines are going to be. So if I have a perspective where the horizon line is coming this way and I taper the lines more extremely, of course, I'll start to skew the box and it becomes much too harsh because the vanishing points are too close together and you get a very warped and skewed looking box form. So understanding distances and also the way even lenses and how eyes will work by looking at boxes, it's all the lessons of perspective that you have to take. Only way to learn them is by taking classes. Now, of course, you can read books, you can go online, and you can look at YouTube videos or whatever the case is and get some of the fundamental basics. But having someone there to show you a step-by-step process and how to build perspective work is actually quite crucial, and I would recommend it. If there's only going to be one class in your future that you might want to actually take, perspective would be main one for me. So find resources and take them. So as I go into this drawing now, I built up a vertical and a horizontal, and this vertical line right there represents the corner of a box that's going to be on a tank. I'm going to work my way back this direction. Again, I have not established my vanishing points, so I'm just assuming what direction it is, but I'm able to visualize that using the reference, but also from there, from the building of all the drawings I've done before. So the experience of all that stuff I carried over. This horizon line is important because it establishes, again, where the vehicle is located based on your positioning. Where the photographer or you or the person taking the reference is positioned, these are all things that you have to be able to analyze. So is the person looking straight on at it, and where's the horizon line in respect to the actual vehicle? Is the horizon line higher? Is it lower? And based on where that is, the vehicle obviously changes its orientation of not just rotation but up and down based on what the cameraman is doing. And also, as you draw it in person and live, you have to also understand where your horizon line is and all that kind of stuff. Seems complicated, seems overwhelming, but in the beginning, as anything is, sounds a little bit complex because you're unfamiliar with the process. The more you do it, you get used to it. As we start to build this, I'm looking at the reference right now, and I am noticing the track being a larger section. So like right here, as I'm seeing that the horizon line in the vehicle at the moment is kind of going right through the center of that vehicle itself. So as I place that down, I'm going to put the corner of the vehicle track right there. I'm going to end it down over here because these guides are just guides only. They're not actually indicative to the tank itself. It's just lines that I can use. As I work my way in, let's establish a cube here. This is going to represent the first kind of gear that's in the tank. As I do so, I can also then establish additional boxes which are much smaller. And this particular tank has about 9 small sets of wheels in between, and I can use this to then kind of count out the length of it. The tank that I'm currently drawing at the moment, the model of it is called the Churchill, and it's a very massive, bizarre looking tank. From there, I can kind of establish my first ellipse, and as I do so, you imagine as the vanishing point on the left is coming this direction, and as it goes through the central point, this is what we call the minor. The minor is the shortest distance between two ellipses. I can then also establish then the major, and the major is then the longest distance between the ellipse. As I do so, this will give me the orientation as to how I draw the ellipse in there. So I now have tilt, and I can continue to count of this box as it goes down the plan, and I'll count 9 boxes out. Okay, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. So this thing also will have an extension coming back one. Actually, this is about back this way one, an additional one. So there's going to be 1 to 9 here, and extra space. There's the front and the back, which is slightly elevated. So we can now start to kind of establish even more of these ellipses inside of it, and I'm going to follow the same kind of guide. And I'll just freehand the ellipse. And of course, when it comes to the ellipses, a lot of this is about the muscle memory practice. The exercises that I teach in my classes of dynamic sketching is a huge aspect of it. If you're interested, you might want to look into it in the future. As I do so, I've counted 1. This connection of this area, the silhouette of the frame of the track, comes around as it goes to the back end. This line will carry over. You'll see another gear on the back side. And it's not apparent, it's not visual, but I'm still going to draw it. As the horizon line is established, the minor is basically parallel with the horizon line, so the major is also just vertical. So the ellipses inside here just kind of go up and down like that. As I kind of established all this information, there's a lot of tech detail in between the track. It's in this space over here. Again, I understand that you guys can't see necessarily the reference, but you don't necessarily need to see that. This is just a demo to show you how I set up drawings of these kind of vehicle forms, which I've been posting on social media. So as you can see, there's a lot of construction that goes into place. I don't just sit there and just draw it as I see it. And I don't just kind of start with one detail and all of a sudden just kind of create it. The construction part of it is for me to communicate to people as to how I do it in the class, but also it's important for me to understand how I do it in process, for me to have the memory that I can use for future vehicles as I continue to draw them. There's going to be additional details over here. And the width of the track is going to be from here to here. I'm just kind of marking off using observation skills, and then constructing planes. As I have the planes, I'm not drawing curves. The planes will give me the control of straight lines, widths, and changes. So even though this track is actually curved, I don't draw the curves. This track will then continue down this direction here. And I know some people may want to ask about things like, what kind of pen are you using, that kind of stuff. But don't worry about that. The pen doesn't really make much of a difference in this situation here. You can use any sort of drawing tool and you'll be fine. These are some of the inner details inside here. This ellipse is slightly elevated, but it's okay wherever it is. Now as I've done so, there's some additional compartments and prop pieces that are attached to the side. I'm not going to draw them to the exact details. I just process them down to just blocks of forms, using the guides as a way to help follow the perspective of stuff. So I don't necessarily have to kind of plot where everything is. I just use these lines I've established as general guidelines as to knowing what direction to go into. Because everything kind of links together as it goes down lengthwise, but also then width. And because this vehicle is sitting on top of the horizon line, the stuff above and below, I'll understand what direction to go into. So as I get to that side of the track, I'm going to now carry these lines over to the other side. And I am now going to estimate the width of the tank coming from here to here. The front end drops down, comes forward, meets at this point. So at the moment, all I'm doing right now at the moment is just using kind of observation skills to kind of plan out where things are being plotted. As I carry over the track to the front, these lines can be again carried all the way through. The front end of that box is carrying off much wider to this side. This will go back in perspective that way, which links up with this line here in the front. As I've done so, plane change is right here, as it then goes parallel to the lines to this side, which gives me the track on the other end. And for people that are listening in, you don't have to just listen. If you want to ask questions, you're more than welcome to. It doesn't bother me to talk about other things as I'm doing this, because I'm able to draw and have conversation at the same time, and think about other stuff as you are asking about things, because I can just draw this without even having to really honestly think about it. Question is even like, have I even ever drawn this tank before? And again, this is a Churchill tank. I've never drawn it. So I'm observing and looking at the reference and getting a sense, but because I've drawn so many other tanks before, I'm able to generally understand how I would approach this, even without the experience of actually having drawn it. Well, in terms of like the whole idea of like, why don't you just rotate the canvas at all? This is on a piece of paper. In a sketchbook, do I do that? I do, actually. When I have a sketchbook, when I'm drawing live, I will tend to actually move and rotate quite a bit. And I have learned to not do that as I'm doing things like this in live streaming, because I understand that if I'm constantly doing this, it's disorienting. Even like in Photoshop, when people are drawing, it's completely, it just takes you out of the flow, because as you're watching it, and especially in time lapse, when you're using digital, people are zooming in, zooming out, zooming in, zooming out, and it's a constant like craziness of image, and you can't follow what's happening. So I've always learned to just like be able to keep locked in place, and I'm not moving the paper, but I can move my arm and body and get the lines that I want in execution. But that's not to say that if I'm drawing just for myself that I wouldn't rotate the paper. I would, but I'm just mindful about that kind of stuff. As this is carried up, this will go one up this way. So I'm usually taking the height of the track. I've already counted halfway point, so half of this goes up one, so this is 1 to 2. That's the proportions as we're going right now. I count one box here, count up that way. I come from the track, I'm taking the visual reference of the image in the reference, and I'll take this and I'll carry one up, and I count that upwards, and I'm noticing the turret ending just slightly below it. I'm getting a sense of an orientation of where the box of the turret is. The corner of the box is already here, here, following that direction of the guideline, which then changes direction to go to the left vanishing point, and the box ends over here for the front plane, which will go that way, following that direction, these lines. Now that I have the box set for the turret, everything is relatively set up, so now I know I can place in the center point. I can even cross this off, find center point, and the cannon is then pointed upwards. The end of the cannon is at this point here. I use the vertical to have a reference of another image that I've already placed in the drawing. So if I connect this dot to this dot, this is now where the turret, the cannon is placed in. I know the length of it because, again, I used a vertical line to match up to where visually I'm linking things together. So I'm using observation of the reference and also in combination to lines of construction to pinpoint where things will end or where they'll start. As I've kind of generally placed everything in here, construction-wise, I'm relatively done. And now at this point, I can now kind of curve things and turn it, make it more rounded. And the busyness in the beginning of the construction is always a frustrating aspect for many people, but I'm not concerned about that because the construction for me actually helps a lot. It's not visual noise. People appreciate constructions. At the same time, as I continue to add more information, the construction will eventually begin to disappear. As I have the turret and the cannon going this way, cross contours wrapping around that direction. There's a corner of the turret. I'll make minor adjustments based on proportion. Some parts I'll just indicate through simple shapes. Some things can be just gestures. They don't necessarily have to be fully detailed. Mark making. Let's go to the front of the track. Separate all these elements. All this stuff is in shadow. I can't see it. It's in shadow here. This is in shadow there. Vloopy asks, what do you think of iPads being a professional drawing on the go medium? I think it's fantastic. I use it for personal and professional means all the time. I will do professional work with it if I'm traveling on location. I will do a lot of personal studies with it on location. I will use it for education as well to communicate demos to students. So it's a very versatile tool, not just for the iPad, but for the app of Procreate is what we mainly use. The new Photoshop, I'm not really playing with at the moment. I tested it, but I downloaded the latest version of the beta. It's okay. It's in a very early primary, I guess a primitive state. It's usable, but it's not ready for professional use just yet. And I think it's good for just kind of people to play around with. It's a good sketching kind of app, but that's about it. Procreate still, I think, is at the level now where they've kind of fine-tuned their app to be on a level where it can be used on a more professional means. Thanks, Travis. Appreciate that. How long have I been streaming? Maybe, I don't know, 20, 30 minutes. I'll go whatever length I need to, honestly. I just choose when to stop. I might end up ending in about an hour or so as I finish up this demo. And again, every stream in the beginning will have some sort of educational value, and then once we end that part, we move on to something else. What I'm going to do at this point is, well, you know what, let's continue adding a few more components of details. Now going to the track, I'm going to kind of separate all these pieces. The track detail is quite complex and heavy, but I'm going to find a way to problem solve all that complexity through indicating these features and details. The spacing in between has these linkages and chains. It's using marks to kind of indicate detail work, but it's not necessarily exact. It's just showing you that there's something there. And by being able to just indicate it and doing it consistently, but in a way that kind of reads, people just understand what it is. And as long as it communicates clearly enough, you don't have to go through the exact detail line for line, part for part, because again, you let the viewer do the work for you. And that's the efficiency of drawing that has to be established over time when you begin, your training. In the beginning, you get overwhelmed with the amount of information that's in front of you, and you want to capture and draw everything. But the trick to drawing is about knowing what not to draw. What is the curriculum of the course you plan to teach on your own platform next year? Will it be similar to the one at CGMA? To some degree it will be, because the class will be the same class I teach and I have been teaching the last 10 years at Art Center, CGMA, other places, which is formatted based on what this is about. Using things of primitive shapes and draw through techniques and understanding forms to draw observationally and look at things in life. So that will be taught online through my own format, and it will be a 8-week course. And I'm only taking 15 people per course, and they will be upwards of 3 hours per session, and everything will be done live. And there's not going to be necessarily a set video because the videos get old and then I have to constantly update them. And I prefer doing things live where I can do lectures and demos at the same time, which is always going to be then constantly up to date based on what I'm talking about. And the subject matter will vary from term to term. And the thing is, because there's no set curriculum per se, each term will always feel somewhat different because my subject matter might alter. I might even change the orientation of what we draw. So they'll constantly go in flux, and as people if they potentially take the class again, it would potentially feel somewhat unique. But then also, if there are people that take the class again, I can work with those people over and talk about what we need to do to expand your experience. And I can actually work with those people to say that you've already done some of the exercises, well, let's bump it up a bit more and go to something else. And while you're in that class with other people that are just starting. So I can work very personally with people too in a small group like that. So Newman asks, do you have to study about your subject beforehand in order to draw it from observation, or are you able to draw complicated subjects like vehicles and animals right when you see it for the first time? And at the moment, I can draw it right when I see it for the first time. But in the beginning, as you are studying the methods, it is important to kind of build some sort of understanding, familiarity of how to draw elements of different subject matters, and many things can connect and bridge together by knowing a system of practice. And again, like I said, everything, once it has an archetype, when you find it and you understand what it is you're trying to do, You can formulate a plan beforehand, and as you go to new things and subjects that you never have seen before, because you have a little bit of experience of seeing other things and you know how to then bring that stuff together to some degree, it can build the confidence to at least try. And the idea is that anything that you draw for the first time, you're not expected to be able to master it because obviously you've never drawn it before. So how could you understand how to approach it? So you go through a lot of failure, through a lot of repetition and practice, and eventually you start to get a good honing in on what it is it takes to kind of solve that problem. I'm actually gonna see stuff like this is the idea of being able to adjust a proportioning is always going to be there because this track right now has a lot of extra depth coming underneath. So in the reference, I'm seeing that right now. So in any sort of drawing, you have to understand that you don't have to feel necessarily locked in on what you just created. You can always adjust by making things longer, taller, controlled proportion changes. Things can always have room for slight adjustments on things. By knowing how to hide those elements of construction and overlap them properly, you can get away with a lot of stuff. From Sarah Tan asks, can you elaborate further on using the shoulder to draw straight lines? I really don't use my shoulder much when drawing unless I'm drawing large ellipses or loops. Most of my time I'm using the wrist and elbow to draw lines. When I'm drawing these lines currently, my elbow is lifted from the paper. My wrist right here is the anchor point. This is what I'm sliding along the paper right here. So when I draw with the pen, I am holding it with my middle finger here. It's resting on top, and I'm basically pressing laterally in between those two places. So I'm squeezing right here, not pressing down, but squeezing at the sides. The distance of the pen I can also adjust, and then I slide along the wrist to then be able to judge distance from the paper. So this placement of the wrist is important to control pressure control. The elbow is lifted, and I'm moving along with the shoulder and the elbow to get the lengths of lines that I need. So, but the wrist is giving me the context to distance from the pen to the paper. Now, do you have to draw that way? No, you don't. Definitely not. Draw the way that feels comfortable to you. Do you have to hold the pen in a certain way also? Absolutely not. You can hold the pen any way you want to. Let's just keep hatching on top of this one for a second. Let's go. Right now, let's just kind of establish this corner right here. And what I'm doing at the moment, and I get a lot of these comments, and I just never have a chance to respond to them. And people tend to respond anyway, so I just kind of let them do it. People ask about, like, what is that circle? Why do you do that? What is that about? So the circle I just created is just to help me control where your interest of viewing a focal point is supposed to go. So I want you to look here. So the information of details will be placed in that area. That's it. So in between these tracks, I'm going to just kind of block in a few additional darks. And this is not going to be one I'm going to take any further than what we have right now. This was just a demo to show you how I begin setting up these kinds of drawings. And then I'm going to do something else. I'm actually going to create a drawing and a piece that I don't know if I'll finish live here on stream, but I will definitely get it started. It's something for the show coming up right now. It's called Designer Con in Anaheim. I'm sorry, and I'm going to be doing a drawing of the Blacksmith, a character that I have, and I want to present it at the show. It does take a massive amount of time. In most situations, you'll never get a full control of it because you are not a robot, and the finesse and the control that requires to get that precision is never going to be one-to-one exactly as you always expect it to be, because something might just get loosened up, or maybe you don't have necessarily the right feeling. The tools can also affect the outcome and influence the feeling of the way you draw stuff as well too. And again, because of every single drawing, it has a different thought process going into it. You get overwhelmed, or you're thinking of something else, and you're not mindful of certain motions and movements. And again, like I said, you can misjudge directions very easily because we're people. We're humans. We can easily make those mistakes because we can't plot things exactly as they are. But that's okay, and that's a good thing actually, because why would you want to be so robotic? You want to be able to have the freedom to adjust and adapt to every single motion and movement, and also understand that those are very good things to have. It gives you unique lines and spontaneity and potentially problems that you also then have to solve. Right now I'm just kind of placing in a few hatch marks to indicate a lower value in this area. Well, there's no set time, unfortunately. It's like asking, you know, how long will it take me to, if I wanted to get into sports, how long would it take me to learn track and earn a gold medal in the Olympics? And like, I have no idea. It could take you 10 years, it could take you 1 year, it could take you 5 years, it could take you forever. It might not even happen at all. No guarantee. Just because you invest time doesn't mean you're rewarded with it automatically. But that's the risks that we take, because it's not just about having only the success of certain things. We do it because it's more than just about having this concept and this expectation of being able to have this outcome of a reward. We do it because it doesn't matter about any of those things. We do it because we love to do it. Again, that question, like right here, that Art Farkman is asking is, do I have to draw basic shapes, fundamentals, perfectly to move on to the next stage, right? And that question is not I'm not saying that's the wrong question either. You guys are welcome to ask any questions you want to, and there is no wrong question. It's about obviously asking it and having to have a conversation about what these things actually mean. We got to dissect that question. Again, that question of then what is perfection, right? And if there is a sense of perfection in constructing box forms, well, are you doing it freehand or are you doing it with tools? If I use tools, I can probably get more control, but obviously I can't use tools everywhere I go. If I'm drawing at a location, drawing tanks in a museum, I can't sit there for an hour plotting everything out, right? So if I draw everything by freehand, well, there's a certain level of quote unquote perfection that I might be able to attain. But then what is that? Well, maybe you have to search for it. You'll spend years and years thinking what that is. Eventually, what you'll come down to is understanding that perfection doesn't exist, especially in that form of study. What's important is then the understanding of how to start, understanding what the level of intention is. What is your finish, right? Not perfection. What are you trying to communicate? That's the most important thing. What I'm trying to communicate to you is how to set up the perspective of a tank. I had this sketch here, and this right here, this sketch, if I asked the question, is that perfect? Well, you would say, no, that's not perfect. The lines are wrong over here and here. But that's not the real question. The question is, what do you know about this based on communication? Well, that's a side view. It helps me understand about how to build a certain tank using some basic shapes. My intention was to show you the proportions of that tank using a basic line and a form. I didn't care about how it looked. So if that information is being communicated at the side view, that's a finished drawing to me. I don't care if it's perfect or not. But if it communicates something clearly enough, then I've done my job. These boxes are here to communicate to you the different sorts of perspective you can use for boxes. Are they perfect? Doesn't matter. Are the lines perfect? Again, doesn't matter. Does it communicate what those perspectives are? It does. Then my job is done there. This is to show you the different orientation of the box and rotation of the perspective. Are the lines perfect? Again, none of this here is perfect. There's tons of mistakes everywhere. But those mistakes, you can look at them as something negative or something based on the fact that it's just part of how you do it. And so then you embrace it. That's just a part of how you just create. The mistakes are a part of it. So from there, you're free to move forward and keep creating. So then my intention for this sketch right now is to set up the box, show you the tank, and now I'm just kind of doing a bit of hatching to show you the focal point as to what the details might look like on that. So the question of perfection is then not a wrong one, but it's the focus is wrong, what you're focusing on. What you should focus on is, how do I understand the things that I want to draw? How do I communicate it more clearly for people to understand what I'm trying to say or even see? If that means I gotta draw things more simplistically, well then maybe that will help you. Anyways, hopefully that makes sense. Keep in mind the fact that what I'm talking about is in no way fact and in no way me telling you what to do. What I'm saying is think about it. Have conversations of it, question things, try it, break the rules, use your own formats, communicate in other ways that you want to go for, fine-tune your method of how you break things down, make it your thing, make it your tool. That's good advice, Sarah. I would definitely try to incorporate that into the future in terms of different subjects. I just want to make sure people understand that this is not a class. So, this is just more of like me sitting and just showing you certain possibilities that can happen. So I don't want people to get confused that all of a sudden they can come in here and thinking that, oh, I want to learn from you in this is in a class format. And I don't want to, disappoint people in that expectation. I'm not saying that you can't maybe learn something in this, but I'm saying the point of this is to help kind of ease into the next stage. It's just a good way to kind of introduce and talk about my focuses and what I've done in the past and kind of answer some questions that people may have earlier on, and we can move on from there. But it is a good advice, so I do appreciate that. So the focal point has been relatively hit close to what I need to have. I'm going to show a little bit of texture on the top using a bit of hatching techniques. It kind of shows the edges of being a bit more worn down. This tank is not pristine and new. It's going to have a little scuff marks and dents and scratches and all that kind of stuff. That question from before about perfection, in the work, whether at the fundamental level or on the advanced level, is a question that pops up quite often. And again, like I said, it's a very important question, not in the sense that it's a thing that you have to always focus on, but it's one that isn't always answered deeply or explored enough, I think, by many people. Or if it is, typically the answer is going to be about, oh, it's not about perfection, just focus on the fun factor of it. But there are many other things to think about, and it's a huge area of what I tend to kind of try to analyze and kind of almost even meditate on as I continue to also teach and draw and sketch and whatever the situation is. So keep asking those kinds of questions as often as you may hear in certain situations. Again, I welcome those. Madeira asks, any advice on pursuing a career in game art? Well, get to know some games. I'm sure you do. And if you know them, play them. Get familiar with the brand quality. And people may say, oh, don't waste your time playing games. Well, no, I disagree. Play the games. Get familiar with those brands. Understand what those companies are. What do they want from you? What kind of games do you want to develop, right? When you understand what you want to help create, then you have to create the work that fits that context. So then you go train your fundamentals and skills, and then you understand where that skill is going to be applied. You design your portfolio to the specific companies, types of companies of genre and direction of game types you want to go for. And so that way it shows focus and intention, and you train yourself fully with that realization. If you just say, I just want to do game art, well, again, if you have no sense of direction, it's fine to discover and try new things, but you should have a general goal as to what you want to do in game art. I mean, if you don't even know what that is, discover it more by researching it. Do you want to do production art? Do you want to do storyboarding? Do you want to do design? Do you want to do anything with 3D? Get familiar with all those general processes of what most artists do in game art. Yeah. So get into the world of games, which I'm sure most of you already do. So many instructors will be like, don't waste your time. Don't go out and waste your time having fun in a way. It's like, if game is fun to you, keep doing it. What's wrong with that? If perspective gets too messy, for example, another object in the same scene but rotated so that the vanishing points are not the same within the tank, do you still try to work out everything correctly, or do you just eyeball it? In this situation, I would eyeball it. Mainly due to the fact that, again, like you're saying, there's a lot of information to set up, and of course there could be multiple elements in the scene, but the thing is, does that object need to be perfectly set up in that perspective? If you're confident enough in terms of being able to build things generally, you should be able to eye that perspective also. And eyeing the perspective is just as important of learning the basics of perspective. Optical perspective is something of a tool that we can use to plot out our scenes and shots and orientations of stuff quickly without having to sit there for endless amount of time to make sure everything is plotted correctly. And even then, when you plot things so refinedly, you lose aspects of it also. It's very similar to the analogy of this. If I pencil something first and I put ink on top of that and I ink it, what happens in most situations is that you lose the energy of the drawing. Now, when someone is a very good inker, they're able to retain that, but in most situations, the inking also flattens the image. It's the same thing. If I draw with perspective so fine-tuned, I don't really think about the energy behind the actual scene, you might end up losing some of the lines that really communicate that. So in a lot of ways, being a bit too strict can actually defeat your drawing in many ways. It becomes boring. It becomes, stale. It becomes stiff. In drawing, it's more than just about the technical aspects of exactly how to do it right. How do you deal with precise curves when drawing hard surface machines in order to convey a believable drawing? Well, as you've noticed, this area of the direction of the track, I began with bunches of planes. I started with a plane there, a plane here, and then put that in perspective, and here was the ellipse in terms of the gear, and then I came back and then I curved these parts there afterwards. Now you might think, but I don't want that construction in place. Well then, keep practicing this as many times as possible so that way you understand what that actually looks like eventually, to the point that you can just draw the curve straight in. So I like to start with planes and then I curve afterwards. And anything from organic to also mechanical can be started the same way. The idea of anything that can be built with plane structures can be brought in with organics, curves. Which makes it feel a bit more living. Then you start to disguise the construction using things like hatching, darks, suggestions of details, surface information, whatever the situation is, to be able to give you that extra Rita stuff. But this horse, as a living animal, most people have thought it's organic, it's living. So I have to think about the bones and the muscles, and you start to sketch it, and you're like trying to discover what's going on, and all of a sudden you lose the control of the line. It becomes a mess. But you should be able to interpret that as the most primitive of forms, and that's your job. Well, hopefully I'll be out there in Austria next year, which I believe is going to be not just a workshop, but an art event, which I believe certain artists will be available too. I'm hoping to be able to make it. I think it's going to be in April. I haven't talked to Sylvia, who runs the program, just yet, but we have discussed what's going to be happening hopefully in the next year. Again, thank you for joining and showing up and interacting with us, Captain Mojo. Anyways, this drawing is done. It was just a quick demo to show you guys, how we can take the basics of forms and perspectives and draw a tank out of it, and how I set things up. And if you missed the beginning of it, I would highly recommend you guys watch the recording afterwards in the beginning stages and how I set everything up. And again, stuff like this, the idea behind that is that this is all based on a constant element of repetition. And as I repeat more and more of it, even if I'm drawing a tank for the first time, I've never drawn this tank before, I'm able to decipher exactly what's happening, and that way I can get to the next stages of finishing things out to move forward. So I want to move into this sheet of paper right here, and we are going to do another sketch and a drawing based on one of my characters of the Blacksmith. Let me get this oriented just right, and then we'll get started here. Just making sure we're marking of where this will fit. So I'm just going to mark it real quickly. There. There. Okay. Art Farkman, that idea of like not knowing when to move on to the next stage, you're never really going to truly know. You're not supposed to. And there is no moment when somebody comes up to you and saying, hey, you're ready, now do the next thing. That doesn't happen, okay? The idea is that you feel confident enough to think about, well, what are other things I can challenge myself on? Or maybe there's another lesson that carries the basis of what I'm learning into the next stage. A lot of it is based on application. The fundamentals that you learn, you do not leave behind. You carry it through to the next phase afterwards. But it's a gradual shift. It's not a complete one step next to another. It's a constant shuffling as you crawl forward into this. It's a crawling into the mud, okay? And that's what we call it, a battle. You're in the trenches with your, potential schoolmates and others in school, and you're trying to figure out exactly what you're doing. Everyone's lost, and you eventually find a way to overcome. Some do, some don't. But again, like I said, that's a lot of the idea behind this. Okay. Well, drawing is hard because of the fact that you have to break things down so simply. And yes, breaking things down very simply is one of the hardest parts of it. So I was going to do another blacksmith piece here, and I was going to do something more illustrative. So right now in my head, I don't have an exact picture of what's going to go on. This is my sheet of where it's going to fit right there. And at the moment, I'm just kind of thinking about where things are going to go. So do I have an exact picture in my head as to what's going to happen? I have no idea. okay? I know the character fairly well. He's my character. I've drawn him hundreds of times. So I'm able to kind of approach that knowing what he's going to look like. But what's going to happen in the scene is a whole different story because I don't know what's going to happen here. I think what I'm going to do is have another, more of a softer scene in the moment where I might just have him like positioned where he's sitting here, or maybe he's interacting with another weapon he's discovered. I think I might put like a sword right there, and he's kind of crawling up towards it and kind of like almost like reaching out to interact with this weapon. I might put his dog over here on the right. And in actually this situation, now that I just said that, I'm going to flip this composition to the other side. And the reason why I said that is because typically, here's what I had in my head just as I said that kind of stuff. I was going to put the sword here. I was going to put the character here, the blacksmith, as he's going to be reaching out. And I thought to myself, okay, I'm not going to do this. Because that was my first impression. I thought, okay, that's what I want to go for. That's the story. That's the moment. That's what the character's going to do. I wouldn't typically do this kind of thumbnail. I just wanted to show you guys. But I'm not going to do that. And the reason why I'm not going to do this is because this is a typical kind of comfortable angle of view that I want to go for, which is a character facing to the left. And because I'm right-handed, many right-handers will draw characters facing to the left because we draw and we carry our lines back this direction. So we move in this way. So it feels natural to kind of draw characters pointed in this manner. So it's important to always recognize elements of what you do typically. I'm going to flip it. I'm going to put it the other direction. I'm going to have him face this direction, and I'm going to move the camera downwards. I'm going to have the sword coming up like that, and I'm going to have his knee coming up this way, coming down over here, and this will have a lot more of this strong foreshortening of the character in that sense. So in these situations, you always have to be mindful of what you typically do as to what you end up focusing on and what you end up repeating. Give me 1 second, I gotta grab something. Okay, so now that I kind of explained it as how in my head things are working, I just wanted to visually show it to you. And now we'll move into the actual drawing, okay? Cybernomu asks, did you often measure things when you were starting off, or did you get your sense of proportion from repeated freehand practice? It's a combination of both. We use measuring techniques, we use observational measuring techniques, and then we also then do freehand stuff. It's a combination of everything. There's no one set pattern, one thing that we do once and do another. So I'm going to now start to draw this, and I am going to have, let's see. But the blacksmith, his head is up here. The blacksmith is the character that I created in 2014. I made a graphic novel this year, which I put on Kickstarter and just wrapped up. And there's a show coming up this weekend in Anaheim, California, which this pen is dying. I'll change it. I also need to test out a couple pens here, so give me a minute as I find the right pen that works. And I'm working with a brand called Plastic Cell, who did a sculpture of my piece, of my blacksmith. So I'll be there doing a live drawing also, and then I'll also be doing a live painting of that sculpture, which I like to do a lot of sculpture paintings. So I'll be doing that live at the show. Appreciate it again for those of you joining in. So now that I have established right here, as what I've drawn, there's a lot of things that are very important at this early stage. Now, for most of you, it's like, okay, this is where his head's going to be. His eye's going to be right there, and this is his face, whatever the case is. But what I've placed in is more than enough information for me to move forward and understand my perspective, my proportion, my scale, my placement, everything. Now you think, how? What's happening in this situation here? Just one line was enough. This line was the one I started with, right there. Okay, this curve. This curve that I drew is the underside of his bandana, okay? And this curve right here establishes many things, which is one, perspective. So now I know that this is the underside of the plane, all right? And I know that his head is gonna fit underneath that. So his underside of the jaw, mandible is obviously gonna show. And this now gives me the orientation of all the perspective that fits underneath it, okay? So all he needed, literally, for this entire drawing was that one curve to establish the proper angle and to understand where his placement's going to be and the scale of the drawing also. Now you might think, how do you do that? It's like, how do you have this one line to give you all that information? Well, a lot of it is obviously time, just the amount of experience and time invested into the drawing to realize how some of these things can lead into another and give me enough information to be able to keep moving forward and drawing and not having to like think about what am I doing to do next. So I know that sounds very hard to process. And the question then is like, well, how do I even train something like that? And because here's the thing is like, my memory is not necessarily the best, and I have to do a lot of observational drawing and many hours of study even when I was a student. And that was a factor of it, is that I have drawn many number of years and hours on end on a professional level, on a personal level, as a youth and everything else. And there were many stages of moments in my life where I would train very hard. And that's a huge factor of it. It's just you invest the time. You just sit there and do it. And hopefully you repeat it enough where it just kind of locks into your memory. And now I have essentially like a data log of many visuals of just kind of angles of views where I can then replicate and use and adapt in many different ways. I can even just start establishing things like details and all this stuff. And I'm not even concerned about the end result of this drawing. I already know it's going to work. And that's that confidence that comes in from the amount of experience and also just from the method of practice of learning the different techniques from schools and other instructors, and over time, self-realizations and questions that you ask, and you just continue to build on top of that. Now there are some people that are going to actually have that kind of awareness and building of skill set even faster. There are some people that will be able to understand those methods and techniques really quickly because they're just able to see it. It took me many number of years, and for others it might take longer. And there are many people out there that can draw 100 times better than I can, and that's still fine because I want there to be that kind of level of not intimidation, but more in the fact of like inspiration. Wow, there's a lot of amazing people out there that can draw so well, and I like that. It kind of helps me excel, and I don't want to be the one that's like, oh, I want to be the best in this world. That's not the mindset at all. I actually want to be someone who's constantly wanting to learn and be curious about this stuff, how to improve personally. I can even draw in some other parts. Let's put his hand over here. Just even slight indications of stuff is all I need to continue to move forward. Anyways, at this point, I'm kind of on autopilot now, where I literally don't have to think about what I'm doing. I can actually think about questions and answers or things I want to talk about as I'm doing this. Again, do I have an exact picture of what's going to go on? Not really. I just know generally what's going to happen. And I can just adapt to it, make instant choices on the fly. And then I can also change it and adapt to it if I feel like, oh, this is not working. In the moment, I don't sit there and like, oh my God, I don't know what to do. I don't panic on that kind of stuff. I can always find a way to adapt and problem solve it. All right, so now that I got that in place, continue down in the overall proportion. I'm going to bring his leg up this direction here, and his other knee is going to go that way. So, question from Captain Mojo is, have I seen Klaus? Yes, I did. I watched it a couple nights ago, and beautiful, as most everybody is saying, and obviously we can recognize that. And I think everyone's kind of like enamored by the visuals of it, but the story is, I mean, I don't have any harsh critiques of it, but I do feel like there were a couple of weird elements about the story that honestly didn't really make sense, I'm not going to spoil it anywhere for you guys because some of you may not have seen it, but I will say that there are a couple of things in the story that kind of left me kind of tilting my head. It's like, what? But I can understand why they did it, obviously to move things forward. But still, yeah, generally, visually, beautiful. Netflix sometimes does some compelling stuff. and I'm glad that they actually take risks on things. It's the one thing I've appreciated about the streaming content these days, in the recent times, from both Amazon and Netflix and now Disney Plus, is that they try things that they can't in film, or they're afraid to try in film now. I have a problem with foreshortening. I understand which bits are going to be larger and which ones are going to be smaller, but I find it really hard to judge a scale of foreshortening, how much bigger is at hand than the other one that is not stretched in my direction, for example. Well, a simple explanation to that, which maybe I can start with that demo for next week, but I'll give you a simple idea behind it. First and foremost, the answer to that question is to basically do studies, okay? Just to draw it many certain times. Experiment. Well, get the version that you understand what you would do, then do several iterations that break those. So make them bigger, make them smaller, make them more extreme, literally break it, okay? And that's the only way to find out the comparison. You have to have the range to understand how far you can take things. But in terms of foreshortening, the simple concept is this. Imagine we have a box, and this box in 2 dimensions is a square. But once I turn it in space, then you might have something like this. Now we have a cylinder. Now as that cylinder continues to turn, obviously it becomes shorter in this area and the ellipse becomes more full. And eventually the time when you start to become more turned, these ellipses, if I have an internal ellipse in the background, would overlap. And eventually it becomes just a circle. I've done a complete rotation for you. Now, once we do something like this, we introduce the idea of perspective, and then we get something with 2 ellipses that might converge on the back end, and now we have a cylinder in perspective, and that can also continue to rotate, where you might have, again, tapering lines. This is being rotated, becomes a circle. So now you can play with that, you know, the idea of we can go larger and then we can go smaller, and we can connect those lines, and that perspective is played with. So the scale of these 2 planes of the ellipses need to be played with, right? So you can go larger, you can go smaller, you can go more even, and this is not necessarily really pushed very hard. This is pushed much more so. You can also then play with things like overlap. The idea by overlapping the ellipses will give you a better sense of depth. And the problem with foreshortening, as people draw them, is that they actually just draw the length of the arm, and they make things bigger and smaller, but they don't necessarily truncate the length of the spacing in between, because as something is coming towards you in camera, you're seeing less of that side of the form. You're seeing much more of the front of it, as it's reaching out towards it, whatever the case is. So that's the concept behind it. Yeah, Dark Crystal was pretty amazing. It was something that it grabbed my attention instantly. I can see how something like that would have been a little bit of a slow starter for some people, because if they don't have the concept or even like the nostalgia to the original, then it would be kind of hard to stick with. Question from Sarah Tan is, do you consider yourself a more spontaneous person, or are you more deliberate with things such as drawing? In the beginning, in my natural tendencies is to be much more controlled, to have plans, to have working orders of such things, to be very deliberate in certain areas. Over time, I am trying to become more spontaneous, to become less in control of certain things, to feel things out, because my natural, again, tendency as a younger person was black and white. And it was also about not wanting to feel things. Emotion was a weakness to me, right? That typical kind of male mentality, which, you know, when you're younger, you kind of fall into. And as you become older, you become less caring about that kind of stuff. And you want to think about more connections and, you know, how you should feel about stuff. And so that's what's changed drastically for me, that I do want to think about those more. Question from Jeff is, what kind of stuff inspires you, like makes you just grab a sketchbook and start drawing? It doesn't take much. It never really has, you know. A lot of times just my brain spews information at me, just randomly. A lot of it is just based on the things I've observed. It's built on stuff that I'm always interacting with. You know, I read certain comics, or I'll read, you know, certain books, or I'll watch a movie, or I'll, you know, play with friends with toys when I was a kid, and it would just, you know, resonate there, and then my brain would just like spew more of that stuff, you know, out at me. And now, because a lot of it, again, everything that I tend to create is always inspired by some sort of observation or interaction. Many things could be based on culture, all the travels I've done, the people that I meet. Life as an experience is the huge aspect of how the inspiration, but the motivation is to draw. So there's no shortage of the things that I want to just keep drawing. I can literally sit down anywhere and just start sketching, because everything to me around me is something of interest, something of curiosity, something to learn. And people, it always confuses me when people sit down where I'm at, like, you know, maybe we're at a bar or a cafe, and they're like, I don't know what to draw. You know, I have no inspiration. It's like, what are you talking about? There's so much around you, from the people, the noises, the sounds, the smells, the cultural, the architecture, the fashion, everything, designs of certain things, the everyday consumer, you know, stuff that we have on our hands and our pockets, to the, you know, larger aspects of things like the vehicles and whatnot. There's, again, an endless amount of information visually around you. And to me, I see the world that way. So it's incredibly inspirational. Even the most mundane of things can be the most incredible stuff to analyze. But people don't see it that way. They kind of have to think about, I want this crazy, vast, massive, like, you know, insane thing to kind of inspire me. I need to go, you know, look at the most distinct things, or even specific things. They want to see the exact thing they need to have to be able to draw that thing. And it's like, I don't know. I think, from my opinion, that's a little, I guess, not necessarily inhibiting, but it does feel like you're in chains, you know, like you're locked to be able to even just create. Bring that down a little bit. Well, of course, and that's a given. I think if you're creative, you need to have a sketchbook on you constantly. And if you don't, then you're not doing it right. But, you know, that I understand too that drawing for others is not the same as it is as for me. You know, like the idea of me, I can sit down anywhere and just draw, makes sense. It's like I that's what I do. But I can't necessarily expect that people can all do that, because this is also not necessarily a technical thing of how, you know, your brain is wired. It's also about the feeling aspect of it. Like, you need sometimes more than just visuals, you know. Another times it's also, people require a certain ritual. They need this, you know, sense of being able to be comfortable and to be settled, or to have, you know, the right momentum, or even like the right even situation and lighting and, you know, all that kind of stuff. And there's something wrong with that. You know, having that sense of wanting the things that you need to have just right is okay. But, you know, when it does become a crutch, when it does become something that you need to have to get into the zone of things, I think can eventually be a problem, because then it's hard for you to kind of always begin, and eventually even that process becomes very fearful. You get scared of like even wanting to start, because then there's that expectation to produce something, and that's not a very good place to be mentally. I want to bring the camera up a little bit, if you don't mind, so shakiness, so I apologize. I just want to be able to make sure you see a bit more of the canvas going around. Let me see if the camera will focus. I hope. Okay. I just need to adjust the image quality just a little bit. I was hoping to get, I need to keep playing with this on Twitch in terms of what I should use in the future. Right now I'm just using my phone and the camera on it. And again, it's recording at the 720 source, 720p. But even then, I feel like I wish the video quality was better, you know, all that kind of stuff. Anyways. I understand what you're saying also, Sarah, in terms of being the contrast of what I'm talking about. You tend to be a bit more the spontaneous, in the moment, in the fly kind of thing, and you want to have a more consistent, controlled environment for that to be able to just stay on it, you know? And again, like I said, people are wired very differently in how they experience the world, or I guess even think in general. Yeah, of course, and like I said, you have to be the one to find that. In terms of like the whole scheduling, what works for you, what doesn't work for you, and you can't expect someone to tell you that, because even though this method of how I work, whatever it is, may work for me, it may not work for others. So it's good to try. You can ask those questions and you can find out and then attempt it and see what happens from there. But at the same time, like I said, eventually you have to just make your own choices. Okay, I'm gonna put his knee to the front here. It's going to be a couple of rock forms on this side. I'm going to bring his other leg up this way. And it's going to be going away from the camera in this direction, where his other leg is going to go back this way. And the Blacksmith has this fur on the back of his lower end. And he does have a pack with a bunch of weapons in it. And I'm just lining right now. I'm going to come back in and darken a few of these spots. You know, there's a comment from Jeff saying I would draw outside and about, but I'm very self-conscious and it hangs you up. And the self-conscious feeling of it, there's nothing wrong with that. It's actually very normal. And the thing is, so was I. You know, when I was younger, when I was drawing in front of people, or I was even talking in front of people, I'd be very self-conscious. I'm always concerned about the way people thought about me and what I was doing and how well I did it. And there was always that stress of like, oh man, you know, I don't want those eyes on you. And again, that's just the way I was naturally was as a person, individual. I still am to a degree. I'm just able to flip things on and off in the way I want to. But now I kind of revel in those situations and how people are viewing and wanting to see more of it. I like those. But that's just a change of, you know, how I have now grown. So Jordan asked about the schedule. I do. So if you look at the heading on my Twitch header, you'll see that my scheduling is on usually every Thursdays evenings at 7 or 8 p.m. Pacific time. Today I'm just doing it on a Wednesday earlier because unfortunately tomorrow I have a couple of conventions and shows that I have to attend, and I will not be available in the evening to be able to do these live streams. So the shows that I'm doing is one called CTN in Burbank, California, which is an animation expo. I'll be there not necessarily presenting. I'll be there just honestly hanging out and partying, and I'll be helping out with a couple friends at table that have their own tables and such. So I'll be just networking, meeting up old friends and whatnot. So I'm pretty sure that a couple of those will be late nights. Then on Sunday I have to go to Designer Con, which is in Anaheim, and Designer Con is a big kind of toy design expo, which I will be at for the table with a couple of friends who own a brand called Plastic Cell, who are actually doing a sculpture of this character. And they're doing the prototype and they're bringing in a copy of it tomorrow on Sunday, which I will then also live paint. And so I like to paint models, so I'll be coming in there and doing some live painting. That's one of my hobbies, is like building models and painting sculptures. Resin kits are also a lot of fun too. And I make time for that kind of stuff as much as I can because it's fun, and why not? Do the stuff that's fun for you all the time. Drawing is immensely fun, and I do that constantly. So the other hobby stuff is just to break up the routine and helps me gain more inspiration. I just like also doing it. This is the third stream, only the third one. So it's only been 3 weeks of me doing Twitch. Typically I did my live streams on Instagram, and I felt like that was my only choice, and I never really liked it in the first place because, for one, the orientation sucked because it's Instagram. Two, the quality of the videos were horrible, and it never saved out. And even though the option of it was there, it never really saved to my phone, so I wasn't able to post it anywhere else. So it's buggy as hell, Instagram, honestly. A lot of things just don't work on it. You know, it's really inconsistent. I personally feel like Instagram is not going to last for another 5 years max, you know. Not to say it's going to disappear, but in terms of its, I don't know, application, the where people congregate, if in the next 5 years something else pops up and it does lock in on the right audience and the methods, I would say it might take it over. I did a YouTube for a little bit, and I do YouTube mainly for just videos I produce that are things like reviews, impressions, which I would never really do live. Those ones I would only put on YouTube. But live streams, I've tried once on YouTube. I just didn't also like the feel of it. I don't know, it just wasn't my thing. But I could be just because I just started and I wasn't giving my time to it like I am this. So it's all about consistency. And honestly, if I did, only 3 of these live streams and all of a sudden disappeared and I never showed up on Twitch again, of course nothing would happen. People would be like, where'd you go? And nobody would follow me. So like anything else, you just have to like stick with it. And I think having that schedule for this one, it's necessary. Like if I said I'm going to be on live and I never announced when, and if I did announce when I didn't show up at the times, then of course, again, like I said, people wouldn't have a cause to follow. And I'm not really looking for follows. I'm looking for different platforms to be able to share, whether it's a large followings or not. It's just more of an outreach to be able to actually connect to people. And that's what it's really about. And that's what everybody's been saying the last 3 weeks, Cybernomu, and the fact that Twitch seems to have, like everyone's saying, a good community. And, I don't know what some of the terminology is that people keep saying. Like, the whole raid thing is still a little bit like, oh, okay, that's interesting. Like, people can actually, invite others in, I guess. Or you can actually share the streams and get people aware, I guess. I explored Twitch just a little bit a couple days ago, just like going into different categories and stuff. Obviously, it's still very much game oriented, and I looked into the art section of stuff, and there's some weird stuff on there, to be quite honest. And I not to say that I didn't expect it. It didn't really shock or surprise me, but at the same time, it's like, okay. It kind of reminds me of like what some other platforms back in the day were like. Like for instance, I was on this channel and I watched it for some reason. It was like some woman doing body painting of herself. And I was like, yeah, I can see why kids would be watching this. I guess that's art. Hey, as long as they're doing what they love, I'm not going to judge. And if they're having fun and it's not harming anybody, go ahead. But yeah, I spent like 10 minutes on that, and I knew once I found that, I was like, yeah, okay. And this is just me going through the news feed, the stream, like what was active at that moment, So I wasn't looking for anything specific. I was just like, I wonder what's just kind of on. So I can imagine like any platform, to sift through all that data and content and to have any of your stuff to be noticed at all, it's going to take time. If not, maybe you're not going to be noticed at all. But that's fine. But I do like Twitch's simplicity in its UI, especially on the mobile app and the website one too. I wish there was a little bit more customizability on the mobile version of it, where you have a little bit more control on the desktop version. But I know that they only launched the mobile version not too long ago. So I'm going to change pens again. This one's a bit... I have like 3 or 4, like several pens here are the same ones, and I don't know exactly which ones are new and which ones are dead. So I have to kind of flip things around and find out which one's still fresh. There we go. So at this moment, most of my detail, my camera, my shot is there. I want to include a few more elements around him, and we'll see where it goes. But this is probably, honestly, at this moment, going to only take me about 20 minutes until I need to finish it. So I can judge that knowing where I'm at currently. Normally, I would have been able to finish this a bit faster if I was just drawing it myself. But, as I'm doing live streams, I'm talking, interacting, reading questions, it does delay me to a slight degree. And we're probably getting about the same consistent number of people watching, which is a good sign. The pen that I'm currently using right now is called the Pigma FB, made by Sakura. And this is currently the only pen I will purchase if I don't have any off the shelf. Besides that, I don't normally buy pens anymore, especially the felt tip type or anything that uses non-sustainable plastics or reusable plastics. It's just a throwaway. I don't use one-offs anymore. Unless that's for like a class and I want to tell people about some of the materials. And again, there's, obviously I'll tell students to get some of those to kind of start off on. But for me personally, I don't really use it. The dog will be right back over here. I'm going to draw him last. So now everything is in place. I'm going to now start to kind of darken, push values, indicate stuff, group things together. And for those of you joining live right now, we did do a earlier demo of process and how to construct and whatnot. So if you guys want to go back and watch that again, you'll be able to see some of the more fundamental things that I always begin with the streams. So for those of you joining for the first time, the setup is that I always do some sort of fundamental practice and explanation in the beginning of the stream section, and then we migrate into another drawing, which is more personal, that I want to just produce for myself. These streams I typically did mainly because I just draw anyways, and a lot of the drawings are not for anything in terms of like professional, but just for me. And so it's not necessarily even a practice either. They're pieces that I would use for something else, like for instance for printing or for books or prints or whatever the case is. This one's for the show of DesignerCon. So instead of just sitting there doing it myself, I decided to share it. Now, I'm going to do a couple things here. As I'm drawing this stuff, all of a sudden in my head, there was a bit of advice that I got. And, as we talked about him before, it was actually from Kim Jong-gi. And it's one of those things that I'd be mindful of because, what he said to me kind of rang true. And also I wanted to be mindful of it in terms of his advice and talks and lessons. And I don't necessarily want to draw like him, and nor am I trying to strive to be like that. But there are things that, obviously we interact and we're part of Super Ronnie, and I'll see him at different Comic Cons and shows, and we'll hang out and we'll get dinner. And so we just have conversations. So, obviously because of the fact that we draw all the time, things just come up. And the one thing that he mentioned to me that I should be mindful of is the fact that sometimes when I'm doing some of the shots, the level of focus on many things are very equal and flat. Not flat, but very equal amount of detail. So I can definitely push things back in space more by being able to collect and group things of shadows, which I normally do in a lot of my lessons. But whenever I'm doing things like these kind of full-on either illustrations or character work, I tend to kind of want to show everything, And it's not the fact that I don't incorporate that side of grouping things and bringing focal points, and I do. I think it could be better enforced. And so I'm very open to always get advice on things. Obviously from a man like that, I will listen, and of course of other instructors too. Even learning from people that are, obviously students and learning themselves, I learn from them also. It reminds me of the things that I need to do for myself as I explain to them of what I'm doing, or need to be doing, essentially. So in this situation here, as I've placed in the details in the foreground right in that section, the way I want it to read is that the head to the arm going down this direction to this leg, all the stuff in the back of this leg and that arm are going to be pushed down, either by grouping it all in shadow areas or using less details and darkening it all up, essentially. So I'll actually go in there and be more bold to be like, I don't want to lose it, I don't want to lose it. But then it's like, no, just go in there and block it in. So that sense of hesitation has to be recognized. And for many artists, when you hesitate, you're like, oh, I don't want to touch that, I don't want to ruin it, I don't want to add this or this or this, because you don't know what's going to happen. And at the end of the day, just do it. See what happens. If you mess it up, so what? Will I be painting this in watercolor? I don't know yet. I haven't thought about that. Maybe I'll take a poll. Maybe I'll ask and see what people think. Should I do this in watercolor? Again, I had no intentions of doing anything in watercolor. Not to say that I'm not open to do so, but I just didn't think about it. But if you want to see it, I'm not opposed to it. Of course, why wouldn't you be? There is so much to understand. And here's the thing, if you don't even look at it from an artist standpoint, just as a human being, there's so much to understand, on a social level, on a relationship level, on family levels. There's so much to learn. But you don't think about that stuff, right? Maybe you do. But then it becomes a little scary. It's like, oh, I don't want to think about all that stuff. And then when you only focus on the things you want to do, it's like, oh, but I still have so much to learn from that. I just want to get really good at this thing. And, that fear comes up. I'll never be as good. And that's normal. Again, everything people ask about those kind of thoughts of, the growth, the mental aspects of it, when you're younger, it's like those fears are natural. And they're okay to ask. Because those are typical things that every artist have gone through themselves. So, what do you do in that situation? It's like, well, it is scary. It's like, man, there's just, what do we do? There's just so much more. Every time I learn something, I feel like there's another thing. To kind of answer that, it's like, it's never ending. Never ending. There's always something else. And that's not for me to present to you by saying you have to feel defeated. I'm not trying to scare you in any way either. It does sound scary. It's like, oh, well, it doesn't end that way. It's going to constantly be overwhelming. But it's not supposed to scare you as much as it may sound like that, because eventually, as you become a little bit more matured, you start to understand your directions. You become secure in certain elements of your fundamentals, especially pertaining to the side of art. You're able to tackle those next overwhelming things with relative ease because you know certain things more than you did before. And it's all about the mindset, about how you approach it. Eventually what happens is that you don't become overwhelmed by the things you have to learn. You seek it. You want to know more. You want to become in that situation where you have to find out more stuff. So what you do is you embrace that overwhelmed feeling, or you're supposed to, in my opinion. There are some people that obviously are unable to do that, and they stay in this mindset of fear, and they avoid things, or they're unable to open their arms and their minds to be able to explore those things for themselves, and never have that aha moment or that moment of security or confidence, and they're unable to kind of pass that hurdle, and they're always tripping up, and it inhibits them, and it affects everything from their own mental health, and to their relationships and families, because that one little thing became a little thorn. And it was more than just about technique. It became more about you as an individual thinking now, it's like, well, is there something wrong with me? But there isn't. There's absolutely nothing wrong. It's just a normal thought of like, well, there's so much I gotta go into. I don't, how much time is this gonna take, and you're afraid of the risks you gotta go for because you don't know what's gonna happen. And the biggest fear is more just about you don't know what's gonna happen in the future. And again, that's gonna be the case for the rest of your life also. You have no idea what's gonna happen. And for me, the way I think of it now is that, at first it was like, I don't know what's going to happen. It's like, I should be able to do this. I don't want to do that. Am I wasting time? But what eventually has to happen is that that's okay. I like not knowing what's going to happen, because then anything can happen. That's the beautiful thing about it. When people are so afraid of like not knowing what's going to happen, they're looking for that control, and that control is impossible because you don't know what will happen in 5 years, let alone tomorrow. And so you can't control that. The only thing you can control is what you do right now. And what you should be doing right now is drawing. Drawing with me. I say that all the time when it streams. If you're just sitting there and doing something else, or if you have the time, if you're not busy, and you're just listening and watching, you should be drawing. If you're not drawing, then you're not really going to take advantage of this moment. So anyways, I'm kind of losing my train of thought, But yeah, it's never ending. But those are good things. Because you can't control it, it's freeing actually. It's supposed to free you. Because the fear will start to fade away, knowing that you don't have the control of it, but what you can control is right now. And as long as you're able to take advantage of the moments, and even if you don't, even if you miss that opportunity, you don't regret, you don't feel bad. There's another chance that will come up. And so you keep drawing. Oh, I didn't draw today. Dang it. Okay, I'll draw tomorrow. You can at least plan that. You know what you can do in the next hour. You can't plan the next year because you have no way to predict it. But I like that feeling of not knowing what's going to happen. Because like I said, it's the optimistic outlet, which is the idea that anything could happen. I like that thought. So again, the serious question about I like to start drawing, but I'm terrible and I have no idea where to start. Well, do you think anybody feels like they're really good when they first begin? Of course not. But the thing is, when I was drawing as a kid, what do you think my thought as a 5-year-old was? Man, am I actually good enough? You know? No, of course not. That thought wasn't in the place. It was like, man, I just want to draw dinosaurs. I like dinosaurs. Or it's like, I want to draw the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles. I love that cartoon, or I love that movie, or I love that game. I want to draw these characters. I didn't care what it looked like. I just drew it because it's like I just have them in my imagination, you know? So you draw because it's fun. So draw the things that are fun to you. In the beginning, as you start, just take it into a sense of wanting to explore and wanting to try things because it's enjoyable to you. If it's not enjoyable, well then try something that will help you find that, you know? It's like, is it a subject matter? Is it a technique? Is it a tool? Is it something that you even want to do? Do you feel like you're being pressed into it because, oh, all my friends around me are doing this kind of stuff, I should try it? Well, I'm not saying that's the case, but again, outside forces of environments could be influencing you. And maybe you're just also assuming it. I really wanted to go for this because this seems like a really good career choice. I don't know, maybe that's not the case. But, you know, this day and age, what we do these days, it becomes so popular. There are thousands and thousands of people that want to do this kind of stuff, you know? We're drawing comics, working on animations, working on games, and producing stuff that you grew up with. Why not? But at the end of the day, it's got to be fun. And if you don't have it, you got to discover it. And nobody can tell you what you find fun. I can't tell you what you should draw, because that's up to you. And that question now comes up, what if I don't enjoy drawing because I'm not good, right? I mean, that's a serious question in terms of like, well, what are you going to do in that situation? Well, again, the question of why do you even want to draw in the first place then, right? What is the overall goal set for you then at that point? I mean, of course, maybe I do want to get to that point. I want to make drawing fun, but because everything comes out so terribly, I feel bad, you know? Again, normal thoughts. Nothing wrong with that. I'm not saying that, you know, that's something you have to hold on to or feel regret of, but that's normal how everyone feels. You know, I would produce a drawing when I was younger, and I got old enough, I became preteen, teenager, and I started producing things, and I was hoping for people to respond to it likely, right? That's like, I want people to like my stuff. And if they don't like it, oh man, I feel bad now. I did terribly. It kind of reflects on thinking that they're judging you, not your work. Oh, you're terrible. You know, you're not good enough. Not the art. You think about you and how you're projecting yourself. But that's the youth mentality. But maybe you're not young, or maybe not, you know, just a kid. Maybe you're actually older, you know? But regardless of that, you're pursuing something that is brand new. And because it's brand new, you don't have any sense of familiarity or context about how to approach something. So you can only reflect on one thing, a context of who you are, right? So anything based on art is definitely a reflection of you performing something. And that performance is scary. Because then people can see it, they can judge it. So you got to be able to overcome those things. How do you overcome it? Well, I think the most important element of this, okay, in this long-winded explanation, is to find people, the right people. And what that means is find people that are like-minded, friends that want to draw, friends that want to create, they want to make comics, they want to, you know, write stories. They don't even have to be people that draw, you know. They're people that just want to create. Maybe some are photographers, some are filmmakers. You know how much times I've, you know, made films as a kid, made stop motions, did animations. They were terrible. They were crude. Me and my friends used to use little Legos. We used stop motion, making Star Wars movies. But it's just having someone around you that you can go through the same pain of, of this growth. Man, I suck. You suck. We both suck. But that's okay. We're just trying and learning things. Right? So if you don't have that, where do you look for it? Well, in this day and age, the beauty of the internet is there. As, you know, as dangerous of an environment it can be, and as judgmental and harsh as a social networking can also come off, and as mentally draining and harmful it can also become, there are also a lot of positive elements about it, especially if you know how to approach it. Social media can be a very beautiful thing if you use it properly, which is to connect in this way of wanting to create, to work with people, not to judge people, but to work with people. And we find a network in this manner, right? So you go on social media, you find people like, oh, I like your work, and you reach out to them, maybe they don't respond. And you're like, oh, I feel bad because they kind of ignored me. Don't. Maybe they're busy. Maybe they don't want to talk to other people. Maybe they're just doing their own thing. You can't judge them on that. But maybe you'll find that one person, And that's really a huge part of it. Having the right network, having the right friends. Now, I know what I'm saying right now it is kind of hard to hear for some people because when they grow up, they're not as fortunate. In my own experience, I know I'm very fortunate the fact that I had all these amazing people around me, teachers, friends, all like-minded, wanting to do things and also encouraging me nonstop. So I know that I was extremely lucky. So when I say this kind of stuff, it's not easy to find these outlets and to find these connections. I'm not saying you just automatically just do that, But I do understand that is also an important factor of it, and you have to look for it. It's not going to just come to you. You have to be the one to put yourself out there, and in that sense of when you actually project and wanted to share, it might attract the attention. So anyways, that's the answer to that. So I missed a bunch of questions here. Couple of comments. I'm just kind of scrolling up real quickly. Xcrulex says, do you think learning to draw from life really is important to drawing from imagination? Absolutely. For me, observational drawing is a huge aspect of it. I need to see things to be able to be inspired, Another question from Button Stack was, I have a big issue not finishing drawings because the later stages end up being not that fun. So begin a lot of sketches. Don't worry about finishing it. Just start a bunch of them, At least draw constantly, produce constantly. You'll eventually hopefully build more fundamentals to be able to get to the next stage. And also as you become more confident through time, being patient and disciplined, you'll press it a bit more. And you'll find out what it is in terms of what the finished level you're trying to go for will be, based on more research, being inspired, whatever the case is. Blindadera says, do you have any tips for overcoming shyness and getting better at public speaking and networking? You have a lot of confidence and really shows when you're speaking. I'm sort of curious as to what helped you get there. For me, yes, I was very much an introvert. I didn't like interacting with crowds or people. I hated presenting in front of classes and stuff. And the only way I was able to overcome it were opportunities, situations that were a little bit outside my control. And this is just a part of life, okay? It's easy for me to say this, but it's incredibly hard to do. And for me, again, like I said, I was naturally an introvert, naturally. And I started to grow and became more mature, and that's a factor of it. You just grow up and you care less, okay? But another factor of it was just the interactions and the people around me and the events in my life that carried me through to that direction. Teaching became an opportunity. First, it was, back in 2010 when the school came up to me asking, hey, would you want to teach? And I said, sure, you know what, I'll give it a try. What made me say yes? I think it was just because of the fact that I had the time, I wasn't really quite sure exactly how well I was going to do it, but I had a little bit of experience. I would teach little kids classes at Art Center when I was in my mid-20s. And it wasn't, obviously a huge teaching kind of job, but it was a little bit of helpfulness to be able to communicate. And, I started working professionally, became a bit more confident as to what I was doing. But the biggest factor that really changed me internally was, losing my mentor. Those kind of moments in life where things happen outside your control. My mentor was killed, shot at a party in 2010. He was trying to stop it. And it was, a traumatic event for the whole family, traumatic for me. I was staying at his, family's house when they were visiting at that party, and I heard the news in the morning as the neighbor came over. And so in that moment, I was very close to him and his family. He was my teacher that taught me all this stuff I'm teaching or talking about to you guys. All this stuff that was in this, that's from him, And that's the reason why I teach right now. And that fell on my lap because the school that he taught at, they came to me saying, would you continue his legacy? Would you continue teaching what he taught? How could I say no? I mean, if I was shy and be like, no, I can't do it. I don't think I could do what he did. I wouldn't be able to actually, fill his shoes. I could have easily said this stuff. I'm not ready. I'm not good enough. I could have said that. But I did. I just went for it because I had to. There was no other choice. It was no situations where I just had to take that opportunity. So as I did so, I failed at certain things. I wasn't very good in the beginning, right? I was questioning things constantly, didn't know exactly what to say, doubting myself. But then in time, things passed. I got older and more experience gained, and eventually, here I am. But it's a situation that's relatively extreme in the sense that that kind of life event happened, and I had to adapt. I had to change overnight. Right in that moment, it's like, okay, I have to go out and do it. I got to be able to go out and project and talk to people and present and be confident in what I'm doing, even though I know that I'm not confident yet. I have to seem like I am. And there's that question I saw earlier, like, do you have that what do you think of that imposter syndrome, kind of scenario? I think every artist engages in that in some degree, thinks about it constantly. Am I really who I present myself as? And again, normal thoughts. Awareness is a big part of it. Communication is another aspect. And for me, there's another aspect that I think helped me overcome many things. And this is something that my mentor always talked about too. And I can understand what he was talking about because I can see it myself and others. And what he said was he was able to gauge the hunger in someone. You can tell when somebody was hungry. And I know what he's talking about because when I say this to you guys, you may not have any idea in terms of how that feels, especially as I communicate this, that side of hunger. And you might understand in terms of definition as to what that is, but in terms of feeling, some of you may get it, some of you may not. And what that feeling is an internal gut feeling, right in the pit of your stomach. It's this ball of energy that you can actually feel. And at first, it's really maybe kind of minimal and maybe not necessarily used, and that shyness kind of overlaps it. But this is a physical thing that I can actually feel in my core, and I can pull from it anytime I want to. It's this endless, boundless energy, and I know how to control it. And it's limitless. And I've known that's always been there to a degree, but Norm saw it, my mentor. He's like, the hunger, that's an important thing. It's knowing that you're willing to do whatever it takes to get there, no matter how long it takes to get there. And some people are born with it. Some people can spark it. I think it's innately there in most people, but it has to be in the right environment, with the right people, with the right moments, and it can spark. And that hunger then, grows intensely. And I'm sure, people that in other fields talk about this, right? When you're like in the military, you're doing things like the Air Force, people talk about the zone. You're in the zone kind of thing. So, here's that last comment from Jack the Undying. That hunger you describe can feel good or bad to you sometimes. Is there a way to help manage it from being overwhelming? That's a good question. I don't necessarily have a direct answer to that because I don't think any of the answers that I would give you would necessarily help you understand, because I think the way you would judge and not necessarily control, but influence the direction of that energy is very independent to each person. And you have to do it through patience and through also activity by actually using it. The one thing I would not do is shy away from it. The one thing I would not do is run from it. Okay? So if you feel something internally, and it's when you get that kind of the goosebumps, right? It's again, like I said, people hear this stuff and like, you're crazy. This makes no sense. That's not real. That's you talking it up. But I'm telling you, it's this like weird thing that I can feel. If I travel and I go to like these conventions and workshops internationally, I can go endlessly. And people ask me, and they come to me all the time. It's like, man, how are you still going? It's been like 3 days straight, and you slept like 3 hours each night, and you go for 10 hours straight just talking to people, doing reviews and feedback and instructions and lessons and conversations. You don't seem to feel tired. You stay up all night again, and like we're hanging out and partying too. It's that part of it. I can use that. And then, of course, you'll feel tired and stuff. And physically, you can feel tired. I'm not talking about the physical tiredness. It's that mental core, where you're on and your brain is able to just chew through that with that sense of complete confidence coming through. Mm-hmm. And that's good, Jack, Yeah, that's, again, the environment. Who you're around is a huge factor. And again, people can have this innate feeling, but because of the environment that inhibits it, that suppresses it, that ridicules it, that says like, oh, what are you talking about? That doesn't make any sense. It can crush it. It's that, childlike, innate, endless fear of just going and doing it. Anyways, I know that this is a, I guess conversationally hard to truly understand for some, and maybe you understand, but like I said, that feeling is something that has to be felt. And I try to instill that and also spark in others when physically I'm in classes, because I can also feel it in others. I can see it in others, especially when they have that. And they may be someone that's not truly confident yet, but I can see it, it's I can see there's something there, potential. A lot of it has to do with that. It's, I guess, an element of it is making choices, like deciding something and sticking with it and seeing it to the end. That's one element of potential. Like you made the choice and you did it and you saw it to the end, regardless if you failed or did well. Doesn't matter. That what you said, you did. Thank you, Bloopy. Appreciate that. Stopping by. Anyways, we'll move on from that topic. This is almost pretty much done. I'll throw in the dog. If anybody's interested in seeing the watercolor, I might do a couple of quick washes on this. This is a watercolor paper currently, and so the watercolor paper does absorb the ink fairly well. Holds up to all the watercolor, and because I'm going to be doing watercolor, I have to make sure I don't overemphasize details on many of these open parts. At first, if I was going to be doing a line drawing, then I wouldn't have to be so mindful about that kind of stuff. But now that I think I am going to be doing watercolor, I have to be very, very cautious about how much I push and don't push. Let's do some of the rock internal of this part here. Sorry for the click-clack. That's my old dog walking around on the hardwood floor. This is pretty much good with the blacksmith. He's set. He's good. So I'm going to put the dog in here. Let's use the other pen that's a little bit lighter. I'm going to dry brush him in slightly. So question is, I've been doing the dynamic sketching exercises now for 3 weeks. And the question is, can you tell me what the next step is? Well, I guess my first question to respond to that is, what are some of the exercises you are doing? And after you respond to that, maybe I'll have a comment and advice. Have you ever used chalk pencil? No. I mainly just use chalk straight into my classes for my boards. Thanks for everyone for stopping by again. For those of you that are students currently, keep at it. You're close to your finish. Barada Toxica bought a red chalk pencil from Kohinoor. I think it's like a sanguine. Oh, okay. I never used that tool, so I'm not quite sure. Well, now you know, and you'll know not to ever get it again. Boxes in perspective, texture studies, drawing from life. Okay, now, yes, those are some of the exercises, and those are even some applications of the exercises. And to me, some of the more basic exercises are things like the lines and the ellipses and whatnot, and basic practice of perspective. Yeah, those are some of the principal exercises that you have to continue to learn. And you should continue doing them, obviously, never ending, Besides that, though, the next stages of it, in terms of where you go to next, is the continued application of observational drawing. Now you might think, but I'm already doing observational drawing. Well, continue to tackle things that you've never drawn before, even on lessons that nobody even discusses in the classes, and find a way to see if you can use the learned methods and how you can apply them into something that you've never seen before. Okay, start on some of those things. From there, your next stage is to really think about and meditate on what your next career focus is. Like, what do you really want to do? Okay, it's one thing to learn the fundamentals, but it's got to be used for something, right? Do you want to use it for like storytelling and comics and graphic novels? Do you want to use it for like design and research purposes of industrial design? Do you want to use it for visual development and animation? Again, sketching and drawing is going to be used in some sort of creative outlet. So think about what that outlet might be. And then you got to think about those principles of design or introduction of some of the advanced and intermediate methods, and the drawing skill sets carry over. They bridge over to that side also. So then can you bridge that fact of being able to take the fundamentals and use it for something, right? That would be your next steps, basically. Well, no, the time zone is different. Yeah, no, it's not. It's 1 a.m. I lose track of time sometimes. It's 1. My normal hours actually are, I usually stay up to like 2 or 3, normally. For school hours, I'm up at like 7:30ish. Still fall asleep at like 1 or 2. 2 usually. 1 is normal for me. Easy. There are times where I sleep at like 4 a.m. Is that good? I wouldn't say it is. I think proper sleep is very important. It's just the fact that I just lose track of time because I honestly, I'm either going to be watching a movie or, surfing the web, and of course I'm drawing, actually, a lot of the times. I just lose track. Like, oh shoot, it's 1 a.m. already? I gotta be up at like 8 tomorrow because I gotta help set up at CTN. It's alright. We get at least 6 hours, and normally I'm catching like 6 hours of sleep, which is normal for me. I run very good on 6 hours. I can deal just fine on 4 or 5. Any less than that, then I might as well just stay up all night. Okay, let's move on from the dog. I'm going to bring in watercolor set. We'll do a couple of quick washes and then we'll call it done and we'll be finished here very soon. Let me grab my water brush. I'll be right back quickly. Okay. Let's see. This one. This one will be fine. So let's do a general coverage of his clothing first, which has a bit more of a cooler tone, more grayish. And I'm going to be doing wet washes first. Right now the watercolor paper I'm using is the Strathmore brand. Strathmore watercolor paper. That's about 300 pound. Cold press. I prefer cold press watercolor paper. So I don't go into specifics, I just do general washes at first. And I'll control the light if it's reflecting too much of it, so I'll keep an eye on the video. Okay, so here's a question, which is about character design, and the question is, what do you think about when you design a character? Well, quite a bit, actually. It's a whole lecture in a classroom based on that question. What do you think about when you design characters? I'll try to keep it simple. When it comes to just the simple answer to it, what I want to think about is, who is the character? That's a huge part of it. It's just, who is he? Who is she? Who are they? Based on that, I formulate a general picture based on their personality, where they came from, who they are, on their function, what they do, their culture, their background, all that stuff. I think about all those things. And the more I think about it, I get a good idea of a personality archetype. The visuals come afterwards, because then the visual needs to support, who that character is. But that's the simplest way I can kind of respond, which is, who is your character? Don't worry about, how well can I draw it? Should I study anatomy? Those are obvious things. But when you design a character, here's another way to look at it. When I look at a lot of portfolios of character design work, there's a clear distinction between character design and costume design. And a lot of things that I see normally are costume designs. So they show me a cool aesthetic. Character looks cool. Maybe there's like an Asian influence or a European influence in historical or modern day or futuristic sci-fi or post-apocalyptic. And again, there's some sort of influence in the real world. It looks cool, but then I ask, like, who is this person? Like, what do they do? What were they like when they were 10? They can't answer these questions. They haven't really thought about them. And I think it's important to really get into that level of insight on what and who you're designing. So I would say start there. Well, I'm glad you stopped by. I'm glad drawing became something of an interest to you. And to answer your question, yes. But this is not necessarily a stream for teaching. It's obviously things of questions you guys can ask, and it can become educational. But there are classes that I do teach. This is just more of an opportunity to interact and discuss and talk and have a chance to ask the real questions. Well, here's a response to that comment. I'll even give you, like, I guess another way to look at it. It's like when I'm drawing, let's say live, at a cafe or something like that, I'm at a bar or a cafe, and I'm sitting by myself and I'm sketching. And someone comes up to me, this person, random person, and he looks at my work and says, wow, did you draw that? That's a common question. It's like, yeah, I did. It's mine. And this is what they say. Oh, I couldn't draw to save my life. I can't even draw a straight line. I can't draw people. I can only draw stick figures. That's what they say. Okay. I'm sure you may have thought about this too, or said that before to somebody. I'm sure a lot of you may have even responded that way. Oh, I can only draw a stick figure. I can't draw people. I can't draw realistically. I can't draw, realistically like you do. And there's another way to look at that. Because in my personal opinion, I think anybody can draw. And everybody usually does draw. Everybody at some point, in their youth, as a kid, has picked up a crayon or a pencil and put shape to paper. Okay? Based on something you saw, based on something that you read, based on something that you looked at in a book, you replicate it. Now you grow older and maybe you stop drawing for a little bit, and you get up and you think, man, look at all these amazing people around me. I can't draw. Well, the classes that I teach are basically in the fundamental thought that anything that you observe and draw can be broken down to the most simplistic, primitive form. And even when you draw figures, human forms, when you start drawing people, what do? Well, you just have to understand proportion. You think, shouldn't you learn anatomy? Well, yeah, but there's a certain order in which you take, and proportion is the most crucial thing. And to learn proportion, we can use basic simple shapes and lines to produce a controlled proportion. Now, when you say to me, I can only draw a stick figure. Well, what does that stick figure represent? Well, it represents a person. Now, does that mean that you can't draw a representation of a person? Well, I can only do a stick figure, but it doesn't look pretty. It doesn't look realistic. That's not the question. The question is, can you communicate a simple drawing of a human being? I can draw a stick figure. Then you can draw. Because drawing is about communication, all right? It's to communicate to people a story of, a visual style or inspiration or a moment or fantasy, a world or something representational, anything creative or visual, right? It's communication. So if you can communicate something, even if it's very basic, you can draw. Now, when you want to add things like, volume and rendering and surface details and anatomy. Of course, yeah, you got to do more lessons and practices, but to have the basic understanding, to know that you have the capability to communicate something visually, means you can draw. Greed asks, one major issue I have is with paint studies. I've done a bunch and I do improve. However, I feel like when I do this, my brain goes into autopilot, doesn't consciously absorb the information. And is there a workout for this? Well, again, it differs from person to person. Obviously, I'm sure you understand that. The working method one person will do may not work for you. And for me, a lot of the common responses to this is to be able to build the understanding and familiarity by repeating it. So when we draw, we repeat over and over and over again. Now you're saying I do repeat. I draw these studies over and over and over again. And then, well, the answer to that also is like, well, there's not necessarily a set limit in time of eventually like, okay, all of a sudden you've done this many studies, you got it. Well, it might take 100 more studies, until that light bulb goes off and clicks. But what I will say is that you have to be also very conscious and aware of what you are doing. When you go on autopilot, you got to recognize that. You got to be able to snap into it and be like, oh, shoot, I've gone into that mindset again. And in those situations, there are a couple things you can do. One, stop. Just stop, okay? And do something else. Come back to it. Don't try to finish it in one sitting. Come back with a more clear mind. Another part of it is to, again, force that. Like, okay, I'm going on autopilot, recognize it, be aware, and then adjust. I think in terms of like how you would adjust and how to keep going also is using timers. If you're painting and drawing, use a timer. And a timer is not a timer for stopping. A timer as it goes off is for you to have a checkpoint. To stop and ask questions. What are you doing? How are you doing it? What is it for? So TGM, or not sure exactly how to pronounce your username, but the question like, should I find some pictures of things and like attempt to draw them? Sure. Draw whatever you think is interesting to you. Copy something if you want to. There's nothing wrong with copying. T-Jammy. Or Jamie. Jamie. Sorry. I heard about studies a lot, but what exactly are they from Madeira? And you have to give me a bit more information because that could mean anything. What's the question based on in context? If you can kind of clarify, that would be good. How much of your drawing time do you split into chunks and practice in producing art? Well, honestly, the producing of art is the practice. They kind of go hand in hand. When I'm actually producing something, I'm learning. So my learning never ends. Do I actually allocate time to study stuff? Well, usually when I'm doing demos and classes, that's a part of my study as well. So I'm actually still working and also studying. So a lot of it, again, just goes hand in hand. I don't separate time on stuff like that. They really go, again, together. Question from Walking Pogo Stick is, how do I draw with minimal or no guidelines? Well, you don't. You start with the guidelines. You start with the construction first. Get it to the degree where you have a complete memory of it. If you know how to actually construct it very well, then start to draw more from memory. Then start to draw less with construction lines, because you now know where things go. Again, doing washes still. When someone said they're doing a study or something of master studies, well, what that means is they're analyzing and understanding a method, a principle about many things. It could be a singular element or many elements. And you study masters or paintings of drawings of people that have been around for centuries, old masters or even new masters. It could be even contemporary people today. And we study them because we want to understand. And the understanding can come in many routes of things like composition, value, anatomy, form, simplicity, aesthetics, materials. And the more we study them, the more we copy them, we get a good understanding of it. We have those tools that we can kind of build for ourselves, and then we can apply them. We use it for something. The watercolor set I'm currently using is a brand called Schmink. Give me 1 second, I'm gonna turn the heater off. The heater's on right now. Getting a little bit warm in here. Okay. We are in our last probably 15 minutes of doing this because I don't have that much more to do. You might think, oh, there's a lot more stuff to do with the rendering with the watercolor, but I'm just doing washes, just washes at the moment. Welcome, Mighty Geek. Currently we're just streaming a live drawing. Did a bit of lesson earlier, had some questions coming in, people are wondering about processes and life in general. Anyways, hopefully in the last moments that we've had together, everyone's enjoyed the time that we've been applying here. Hopefully it's helpful to some degree. Again, this is me just kind of spending time to be able to kind of share ideas and thoughts, and I hope it does help to whatever level. Yeah, I can agree with that in terms of the separation between producing and practicing, but I will say that when I'm working on something, the producing of something, like for instance, if I'm producing pages of the Blacksmith graphic novel, I am learning a lot because I study based on like, well, how could I actually practice on things like the composition of the pages, like the panels themselves. And I would produce it and I would look at it and be like, I could probably, I would learn from the way I did it, the method, maybe even the tools I learned from. So in a way, it does help study. And it may not be the study traditional sense where like it's focused on doing a series of compositions where it's still a singular piece that's being produced as a final, production art. But again, what I'm saying is that method still fruits information of data to learn from. So in a way, for me, it is also a form of practice because honestly, that's where most of my time has to go these days anyways. That the time that I need to produce is a majority of what I need to go for. So I need to convert that into something that I can also use as a form of study. But I also understand what you mean, that sometimes people need to sit down and have a clear distinction by saying this is going to be just for studying value, and this is going to be studying for just shape and perspectives, and this is going to be whatever the case is. But like I said, for myself, it hasn't gone to that point because after doing this for 20 years professionally, I don't need to distinctly separate things like that. All right, let's get into the beard area. Just mixing a bit of the paints in here. I'm using a burnt umber with a ultramarine to get some of the darks. I don't just use black. I mix my darks. So that way it can be controlled towards more of a cool or a warm. I know the light is kind of making it shine a little bit, so I'm going to pick it up and kind of bring it a little bit closer to the camera so you can kind of see what's going on. What is something that you learned that really improved your drawing drastically? Well, I think if you're talking about at the stage of when I was a student, I think it was the class that I teach right now, which is the concept of learning to simplify objects and what you see observationally. Everything around us, we can complicate things, we can overcomplicate stuff. I'm actually going to bring the camera in a little bit closer because I don't think you need to see the entire picture. And let's do something like that. Do you have any reference sites or books that are your go-to for anatomy and perspective? Google's not very helpful. Unfortunately, I don't. Right now, there are a couple books that I grew up with as a student that would be very mindful. Unfortunately, I don't have them on hand. I don't remember the exact names of them. So if I find them, and if you come back on the stream another time, I'll be mindful about that, and I'll go search them out. But for right now, off the top of my head, I can't give you the names of the exact books. But I'll keep that in mindfulness in terms of advice about what I can share next time in streams, certain books. Random question, do you sit in a certain position, posture to draw? I've had more conscious posture about shoulder pain and stuff like that. I think it's very important to consider the way you sit and have a certain posture to things. Drawing is physically taxing, okay? It's a lot of endurance. And when people are sitting there for hours on end drawing, it's not very good for you. And I think being mindful about your posture is something that I think people take for granted. And so, yes, you should definitely think about that. Do I think about it? I forget about it sometimes, but I will always try to sit up straighter. Right now, at the moment, I'm not making my head crooked. The biggest problem that I had when I was younger was I would always lean into the drawing, you know? And so I would look at it from a certain angle. And because I would do so, I created a lot of neck pains when I was younger, a lot of neck problems. And I became, better as I started working out more and stuff like that. But now I'm trying to be more mindful of not doing that. Yeah, that's my dog in the back moving around. Sorry with the click-clack noising right now. She's looking for something. Well, I don't think I have the option to have any sort of subscription thing at the moment anyways. I don't really even know how to do that kind of stuff on Twitch yet. And when that option comes up, obviously, I'll weigh the options. And I would also like to be able to offer free streams anyways, regardless of it. But there are certain things that maybe I can have a subscription to, which will have a more premium content on certain things. But yeah. How many pets do I have? Well, quite a few actually. I have this old dog walking around right now behind me. It's a 15-year-old golden retriever. I also have a cat. Her name is Piper, and she's a 9-year-old Scottish fold. I also have a boa, a Brazilian rainbow boa, snake that's a male. I've had him for about 4 or 5 years. I also have 2 tarantulas, and I also have a scorpion. And that's about it. Can you see them? Well, I mean, at some point in the future, when I do the stream and they're settled, maybe at some point I can pick up my phone and walk around and show you who they are. Yeah, someone's told me about that, Adorable Jay, about the whole requirements of, what that term is, affiliate. Again, I don't really truly know what that is. All I know is that it just means that when you have a certain, I guess, level of things that you've done, and Twitch, I guess, would recognize you for something and give you the option for it. But honestly, like, when it happens, I'll deal with it. At the moment, I don't really care. So. Let me move the light a little bit more. Try to get the shine out of the watercolor a little bit. I need to play more with this orientation a little bit. Appreciate it in terms of having you the book. Thanks for the support. I know people are still hunting for that at the moment. Kind of hard to find, but I try to get more in stock in the future. Okay, so I'm gonna go into a couple of the darker values now, and then we'll call this practically almost finished. I'm gonna pull back just a little bit more. Actually, let's kind of fill in some of the other areas of the sword and the dog. I probably will come back into this and just touch it up, refine it, add a bit more saturation to colors. But right now I just wanted to make sure I applied some washes. Sarah, in terms of the next book, will they be publishing the next or the previous one as well in terms of reproducing it, distributing? No, they will not. Well, at least from at the moment. Who knows? I can have that conversation when it comes up because I haven't mentioned that at all. I was planning to just continue to do it myself, but we'll see. It would be nice if they did. You know, the question about lighting, you know, what are some of the exercises and the practices you can do for that? Well, a lot of it, again, comes back down a situation of having an environment that can really reinforce some of those fundamentals. Now, if you can't afford that, of course, setting up your own kind of studio, I think would be kind of nice. For instance, what I mean by this is like having a room set up where you can just set up simple, you know, studies of still life, you know, simple objects, boxes, or any kind of shape, or even like household items, and have a controlled lighting where you can actually put that on there and study it yourself. And you might think, but I don't want to do that. It's like it's a lot of setup and all that kind of stuff. Well, you got to do it because that's the kind of thing you got to go for. You have to see it in real life. You can't just assume, and you can't just only go by referencing information or like photographs, because those references are other people's that they've taken, and you don't know truly what the environment was like. So you have to see it, and so you got to set up those kinds of environments where you can actually see things in lighting situations of everyday mundane objects and draw from those. Okay. Again, there are a few things I still want to touch up on. Clarity, a bit more on saturations, a couple of shadow adjustments. But generally, this is feeling pretty good. If anybody has any last couple comments, questions, thoughts, I hope you guys so far enjoyed the stream. I will be back next week, probably around the Thursday in the evening time. Well, actually, you know what? No, next week is Thanksgiving, so that'll be a little bit tough. What I might end up doing is doing on a Wednesday again. So the day before Thanksgiving, I probably will do another stream to set up before the holiday. Does this also apply to digital? Yes, absolutely. Seeing how things work in the real life. So as you set up the still life and the real objects, you can paint it digitally. So that's why having your own home little setup is important to have. course, you guys, I hope you guys enjoyed it so far. But like I said, now I'm kind of nitpicking a little bit more, and I don't want to do this for the stream because right now all the generalities were done, and I can start to refine, add details in certain parts. But like I said, most of this is now complete, and that's everything I need to have. So if there's anybody else that has a couple questions, do let me know. If not, I will be ending this in a second here. And if you can always talk to me the next time and ask more questions, and you can even prepare stuff in terms of thoughts. And if you don't have any questions right now, that's totally okay. In any case, this will be saved out. Obviously, watch from the beginning because we do have some of the earlier lessons about some of the methods of drawing, which I will show you here again. So if you're just joining me right now, so each stream in the beginning always has some sort of lesson plan, just advice on how to approach certain stuff. And you can kind of watch that in the beginning to kind of get warmed up. You can follow along, draw with me, and then I kind of go into something like this afterwards. In any case, thank you guys for some of you out there internationally joining me in. Of course, people that are local in the future, at some point you get to meet me. Do ask more questions, and I will be traveling more to next year. So if I am in your respective countries and I do an event, come out, check it out, and all that kind of stuff. I don't have a Discord set up. I know people have requested it a couple times, but like I said, social media-wise, Instagram is my main outlet in terms of where I, message and talk to people and announce things. But I'll keep in mind that this whole Discord request. I use Discord for my classes, but I don't necessarily keep it open for, in general for anybody. But again, maybe I'm thinking of it wrong. But if you guys have any advice in terms of what you mean by like use a Discord, how would you say I should use it? So maybe give me that request maybe next time, or even just like leave a comment or a comment in my Instagram, and then I can kind of think about what it is, how I would do in terms of how I would approach that. Okay. All right. Cool. Thanks a lot, you guys. Anyways, look forward to having more streams coming up in the future. Again, next Wednesday is probably when I'll do it in the evening time in the Pacific. And if I see you guys again, great, fantastic. Join again. And if you have more questions, keep asking. But enjoy the rest of your day, and I will see you guys next time. Thank you.